The two words that cancel every affirmation you speak. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that every prayer you speak is already answered before it leaves your lips. And today, we uncover the two quiet words that slip in right behind your own words and cancel the answer before it can land in your life. The very life you have been quietly praying over morning after morning. There is a promise tucked into the book of Isaiah, chapter 65, verse 24, that says, "Before they call, I will answer, and while they are yet speaking, I will hear." And Florence Scovel Shinn would stop you right there and say, "Do you see it? The answer is already moving before the sentence is even finished." So the delay you have been feeling was never heaven withholding, it was two small words slipping in behind your prayer and quietly closing the very door you had just opened. The door was never shut from the other side. It was only ever shut from yours. Say it with me. My word is charged with living faith. My word opens the very doors it names. My word is my wand. Again, my word is charged with living faith. My word opens the very doors it names. My word is my wand. And if you would like tomorrow's teaching to find you the moment it is ready, subscribe now so it can reach you. So before we go any further, type the two words God supplies in the comments below. And if something in you just went quiet as you read that, let it be your seal. The first key is to catch the two words the moment they rise in your throat. And those two words are simply, "but how?" You speak a beautiful affirmation. You say, "Supply is mine now." And before the sentence even settles, your own mind answers back, "But how?" And Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the moment you ask "but how," you have left the kingdom of faith and stepped straight back into the kingdom of the five senses. Because "but how" is the mind demanding to see the mechanism before it will believe the miracle. And the universe of supply was never built to explain itself first. It was built to move the instant you trust it completely. Picture a woman standing at her kitchen counter, bills spread out in front of her. She has just spoken the words, "I am provided for," and in the very next breath she hears herself whisper, "But how?" And that whisper cancels the word as surely as an eraser cancels a chalk line. It is not that the affirmation failed. It is that a second sentence was spoken directly against the first one, and two opposing words cannot both stand in the same consciousness, so the stronger conviction always wins. And doubt spoken with feeling is stronger than faith spoken by rote. Now picture the same scene playing out differently in another home. A man reaches for his phone to check a balance he is almost afraid to see. He has already spoken his word for the day, and yet his thumb hesitates over the screen. And in that hesitation, "but how" is already rehearsing every disappointment he has ever known. The balance has not even loaded yet, and the doubt has already written the ending. This is how quietly "but how" works. It does not announce itself as unbelief. It disguises itself as simply being realistic, as simply being careful, as simply asking a sensible question. But Florence Scovel Shinn would say, there is nothing sensible about arguing with your own prayer the moment after you have prayed it. Consider, too, the young business owner rehearsing a pitch in her car before a meeting. She has claimed the contract is already hers, and then she catches herself running through every reason the client might say no, every objection, every "but how" disguised as preparation. And she has to stop the car for a moment and simply say out loud, "It is already done," and let that settle before she walks inside. And consider also the college student staring at an acceptance portal, refreshing it again and again, telling herself she is only checking, when really every refresh is another small "but how" dressed up as diligence. This is why Florence Scovel Shinn always said the words of your mouth must agree with the desire of your heart, not fight against it. So this week, every single time you catch "but how" rising in your throat, whether it comes dressed as worry, or as caution, or as simple realism, do not scold yourself for hearing it. Simply say instead, "It is already done," and let those three words replace the two. It is not weakness to notice the doubt. It is mastery to refuse to let it finish its sentence, and the very fact that you noticed it at all is proof that you are no longer asleep inside it. I close every but how before it can finish itself.
Before we continue, if you have been speaking the words, and your money, your health, or your love life still look the same, the words were never the problem. So I created the source code, a 90-day program that gives you the missing piece to finally bend your reality. You can find it on getsourcecode.sco, link in the description. Now back to the video.
The second key is to notice that but how rarely began with you at all. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that most of the doubt we carry was handed to us long before we had a self of our own to examine it with. A mother who counted pennies at the table. A father who said money does not grow on trees. A grandmother who sighed every time a bill arrived. And none of them meant harm. They were simply speaking the only consciousness they had been given. But you inherited their sentence the way you inherited the color of your eyes, without ever choosing it. And now you stand as a grown man or woman, speaking a bold word of supply. And underneath it, in a voice that sounds strangely like someone else's voice, but how rises up, and it is not really you speaking, it is an old household still furnishing its opinion long after you have moved out of that house. Florence Scovel Shinn called this racial thought, the great river of inherited belief that every family, every town, every generation pours into. And she taught that we swim in it so constantly we forget the water is not our own. Picture a woman standing in the grocery aisle, comparing two brands of coffee, one a few coins cheaper, and even though her own income has grown steadily for years, her hand still reaches for the cheaper tin without a single thought passing through her mind at all, because it is not her mind reaching. It is her mother's hand moving through hers, an old economy of scarcity, still shopping for two women at once. This is why Florence Scovel Shinn taught that we must consciously and deliberately release the beliefs of our ancestors when those beliefs do not match the truth of an unlimited supply. And notice, she did not say fight them, she said release them. Because what you fight you strengthen, but what you simply set down quietly loses its grip. Picture also the young man who finally lands the raise he prayed for, and instead of resting in it, he hears his father's old warning that good things never last for people like us. And quietly he begins bracing for the loss before the first check even arrives. That bracing is but how wearing a familiar family face, dressed in someone else's old coat, and picture too, a bride planning her wedding on a modest budget, who catches herself apologizing to every vendor for asking questions, as though wanting a fair price were somehow shameful, when in truth she is only echoing an aunt who once taught her that wanting nice things was for other people, not for her. Consider too, two brothers raised at the very same table, one grows up and speaks constantly of scarcity, the other, without ever studying it, simply expects good. And if you ask him why, he cannot tell you. He only knows he was never taught to be afraid of the phone ringing or the mail arriving, while his brother flinches at both, and the difference between them was never luck. It was simply which voice each one chose to keep feeding long after they left that same table. This is why Florence Scovel Shinn insisted that lack is never a family inheritance you are bound to keep. It is only a family habit you were never asked to sign for. So this week, when the doubt rises, pause long enough to ask whose voice is this really? Whose face does it wear? Whose kitchen table is it sitting at? It is not disloyalty to set an old fear down. It is simply refusing to carry luggage that was never packed for your journey. And if it is not the voice of your own highest knowing, you are free to set it down exactly where you found it. You did not sign a contract to keep every fear your family ever handed you. You were only ever asked to keep the ones that are true. And lack was never true. Supply was always the truth wearing a disguise, waiting patiently for you to recognize your own face beneath the borrowed one. I released the voice that was never mine to keep. The third key is the practice Florence Scovel Shinn called denial. And denial simply means refusing to give the old thought the courtesy of a hearing. The instant but how appears, you do not argue with it, you do not explain it away, you simply deny it at once and replace it with the truth. And this must happen quickly, because a thought entertained even for a few minutes begins to furnish itself with feeling, and feeling is what gives any thought, true or false, its power to become flesh. It is worth saying plainly, denial is not suppression. Suppression stuffs the fear down into the body where it quietly hardens. Denial simply declines to feed it another meal. One starves a thing by silence. The other only pretends the thing was never hungry at all. Think of a garden left untended for one afternoon. A few small weeds appear near the fence, and if you walk past without a glance, they are gone in a moment. But leave that same fence untouched for a season, and those small weeds become a wall of thorns. But how is always small in its first minute? It only grows teeth if you let it sit past dinner. Let us walk through an ordinary day. At 7 you rise and speak your word. Supply is mine, and it is on its way. At 7:15, you see a bank notice and but how rises instantly if you let it sit through breakfast. By 9, you are retelling the story to a coworker with a little more proof each time. By noon, you have quietly rearranged your whole lunch plan around a fear that has not even proven itself true. By evening, you wonder why your prayers never seem to land. Notice nothing outside you actually changed. Only the story you kept feeding grew heavier, but watch what happens when you deny it at 7:15. Instead, you say quietly, "That is not true. My supply does not depend on this notice." And you return at once to the word you spoke at 7. The story never gets the chance to grow past its first sentence. Think of a woman who owns a small shop, and one slow afternoon, no one comes in for hours. If she lets that silence talk to her, by closing time she has decided the whole month will be lean, and she begins ordering less, hoping less, bracing more. But if she catches the thought the moment it whispers business is drying up, and denies it plainly, saying instead my supply flows in ways I cannot yet see, she keeps her order as it was. She keeps her face warm for the next customer. Consider too a father waiting by the phone all afternoon for word of a job. Every silent hour gives but how another opening. They gave it to someone else. You should have taken the safer offer. And if he lets each sentence finish itself, by the time the phone rings, his hands are already trembling with a story that has nothing to do with the actual news. But if instead he simply says, "This is already settled," and returns to the small task in front of him, he meets that call from a steady place rather than a frightened one. And steadiness, more than any clever phrase, is what a denial is truly building all day long. Consider also the small habit of a woman who keeps a single index card taped inside her cupboard, and every time worry rises while she is making coffee, she reads it once, quietly, and goes on with her morning. Not because the card is magic, but because it interrupts the story before the story finishes building its case against her. This is not gritting your teeth and pretending the notice never arrived. It is loyalty to your own word, the same loyalty you would want from a friend who does not abandon you the moment things look difficult. They simply stay, and that is what your word deserves from you. Pause for a moment and pick one real worry that has been quietly repeating itself this week, and practice denying it right now, gently, saying that is not true, and returning at once to the word you would rather have standing in its place. Notice how light that single moment feels. So this week, catch the doubt within the first minute it appears, not the first hour, not at bedtime when it has already grown teeth, and deny it plainly, gently, and return to your original word every single time, even if you must return to it 50 times before sundown. This is how a word spoken once in faith outlasts a whole day of small invitations to abandon it. I deny the old story the instant it opens its mouth. The fourth key is to notice that Florence Scovel Shinn never taught us to affirm towards supply. She taught us to affirm from within it. There is a world of difference between speaking as though you are waiting for an answer and speaking as though the answer has already arrived and you are simply describing what is already true. But how always sneaks in through the waiting? Because waiting by its very nature admits that the thing is not yet here, and the mind that admits absence will always ask how absence becomes presence, but the mind that declares presence has nothing left to explain. Pause for a moment right now and pick one real bill, one real need, one real want, sitting quietly in your life this week. And instead of saying, I hope this is provided for, say instead, this is already provided for, and I am simply watching it appear. Feel the difference in your own body as you say it. One sentence tenses the shoulders, the other one settles them. Picture a man furnishing a home he has not yet purchased, walking through an empty apartment in his mind, already deciding where the chair will sit by the window, already hearing the kettle on the stove, not because the deed is in his hand yet, but because his consciousness has already moved in ahead of the address. Florence Scovel Shinn called this taking the attitude of already having received, and she taught that the outer world has no choice but to eventually rearrange itself to match the inner state you are steadily holding. This is not pretending. Pretending is hollow, and it knows it is hollow. This is deciding, quietly and completely, which side of the door you are going to stand on while you wait for the door to open in the visible world. I already stand in the answer I have asked for. Breathe with me for a moment. If this teaching is opening something in you, subscribe now so the next one finds you. There is more waiting to be unfolded together. The fifth key is the deepest one, and it asks you to stop managing your words altogether and start tending the state beneath them, because Florence Scovel Shinn taught that words spoken over an unchanged state are like seeds scattered over frozen ground. They may be true words, beautiful words, carefully chosen words, and still nothing will rise from them until the ground itself has been softened. And there are several things worth considering slowly here, one at a time, the way you would turn a lamp up gradually rather than all at once. First, consider that a state is simply the atmosphere you carry, not the sentence you recite. You can say, I am prosperous 100 times a day, and still carry the anxious, tight, watching atmosphere of a person who does not believe it, and the atmosphere will always outvote the sentence, because the outer world does not respond to the words you say, it responds to the feeling you are steadily radiating underneath them. The words are only the label on the jar. The state is what is truly inside it, and a label can say honey, while the jar itself is filled with vinegar. So before you correct your words this week, spend a few quiet minutes simply noticing your atmosphere. Are your shoulders tight when you think of money? Is your breath shallow when the mail arrives? Does your stomach clench slightly when your phone lights up with a number you do not recognize? That tightness is but how living quietly in the body long after you thought you had already answered it in the mind moved on, but the body kept the old appointment. And Florence Scovel Shinn would remind you gently that a body still bracing has not yet received the word the mouth has already spoken. Second, consider that softening this ground is not done by force. It is done by rest. Florence Scovel Shinn often pointed people back to stillness before she ever pointed them back to speech, because a frightened mind cannot speak a convincing word no matter how correct the words are. A trembling hand cannot write a steady line. This is why she taught the phrase, let go and let it be done, not as passive resignation, but as an active laying down of the oars, the striving, the gripping, the checking and rechecking, so that the current of supply, which was always moving toward you the way the verse from Isaiah promised, finally has room to actually carry you rather than being fought against every single inch of the way. Picture someone paddling frantically upstream against a current that was always meant to carry them downstream toward the very thing they are asking for. Their arms ache, their breath grows short, and still they call out asking why the water will not cooperate. All their effort is spent fighting the very help that was already in motion beneath them, and the moment they finally lay the oar down, trembling, half expecting to sink, they do not sink at all, they simply begin to move, gently, steadily, carried rather than carrying. And this is worth saying plainly. It is not the river that must change its course for you. It is only your grip on the oar that must finally open. Third, consider what this looks like across one ordinary day. Not in theory, but in the small hours where a state is actually built. A woman opens a little shop each morning, and for years she has stood behind the counter watching the door, counting the empty hours, feeling her stomach tighten every time a customer walks in and simply browses without buying. She has spoken lovely words over that shop. She has affirmed abundance out loud before opening the gate each morning, and still the ground beneath her words stayed frozen, because all day long her body kept whispering watch, worry, count, brace, until one week she decides to try something different. She stops watching the door and starts simply tending what is in front of her, straightening a shelf, greeting whoever enters with warmth instead of hunger, breathing slowly instead of holding her breath at the register, refolding the same scarf twice, with a kind of unhurried tenderness she had not felt toward her own shop in years. And within days, without a single new advertisement, the shop begins to fill, not because the words changed, they were always good words, but because the atmosphere behind the words finally agreed with them. This is the whole secret hiding inside this key. The state is the soil, the word is the seed, and no seed, however perfect, argues its way into frozen ground. Fourth, consider the man who applies for the position he has quietly wanted for years. He speaks his word each morning. The right door is already open for me. And then he spends the whole day between the interview and the answer, either checking his phone every few minutes, or forcing himself, white-knuckled, not to check it. Both of these are the same tightness, wearing two different coats. But there is a third way that Florence Scovel Shinn pointed toward, which is simply to go on living, to cook dinner, to laugh at something small, to sleep peacefully, not because he has stopped caring about the outcome, but because he has laid the oar down and let the current carry the question, while he tends the rest of his life with an open hand. And it is very often exactly that open hand, not the anxious one, that the answer finds its way into first. And notice too the quiet detail that his rest is not indifference. It is the deepest form of trust he has, the kind that does not need to be proven every hour to remain real. Fifth, and this one is easy to miss, consider that the state you are asked to hold is not excitement, it is settledness. Excitement is loud and it tires easily. It needs constant fresh evidence to keep burning. Settledness is quiet, and it can be sustained for years if needed. It needs nothing at all to keep burning, because it was never lit by circumstance in the first place. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that faith is not a feeling you must whip yourself into each morning, like kindling that keeps going cold. It is a decision you make once, and then simply keep. The way a person decides once to trust a good and steady friend, and then does not relitigate that trust every single time the friend is a few minutes late. When but how shows up now. In this deeper key, you no longer treat it as an enemy to battle or a thief to chase off. You simply notice it the way you would notice weather passing outside a window while you stay warm and steady inside the house. The rain does not need your permission to fall, and you do not need to argue with it to stay dry. You simply stay inside where it is warm, and this, far more than any clever phrase or any perfectly worded affirmation, is what finally silences the two words for good. Not a stronger argument thrown against them, but a self so quietly settled in its own knowing that the old words simply have nowhere left to land. Like rain sliding off a roof built to shed it. Think of the flame steady inside the glass while wind moves outside it. The wind has not stopped. The wind may never stop, but the glass was never asking the wind to stop. It was only ever asking to hold the flame. And this, quietly, is the entire work of this deepest key, not to silence the wind of the world, but to become, at last, the kind of glass that no longer trembles when it blows. I am the state, and the state is already full. The sixth key is simply to remember that this whole teaching was never about vocabulary, it was about trust. And Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the moment your trust becomes complete, but how loses its grip entirely, not because you outsmarted it, but because a fully trusting heart has no room left for a doubting question. Trust is not a mood you talk yourself into on a good morning. It is a quiet floor you build beneath every word you ever speak again. Think of the woman who prayed for months for a specific sum, and when it finally came, it came through a channel she never would have guessed. A distant relative, a forgotten refund, a stranger's kindness. And she laughed because she realized the answer had been quietly arranging itself the whole time through a door she never knew existed. Notice, she did not wait for the check to feel peaceful. The peace came first. The trust was laid down like a floor before the answer had anywhere solid to land. This is what Isaiah meant when he wrote, "While they are yet speaking, I will hear." The answer does not wait for your understanding of the mechanism. It only waits for your willingness to stop blocking it with two small words. Picture a man who has stopped checking the mailbox 3 times a day, not because he has given up, but because he genuinely has nothing left to worry about. And it is precisely that unhurried man who tends to open the door one afternoon and find the very thing he stopped chasing standing quietly on the step. Trust does not shout. Trust simply keeps living, fully, warmly, gratefully, as though the matter were already settled, because in truth it always was. And trust is renewed quietly, the way you renew a lease on a house you already love living in. Think of the retired teacher who spoke her word for a steady income years ago, and renews her trust each evening not by testing it, but the way you might glance at a lamp already lit simply to enjoy the light it gives. She does not ask the lamp to explain its wiring, she simply lives by its glow. And this is the quiet difference between a beginner and a master of this teaching. The beginner keeps testing the answer to see if it still holds. The master has stopped testing and has simply moved in. So let this be the gentle truth you carry out of this teaching today. You do not have to know how, you only have to stop asking. The answer was already spoken before I asked. Here is the whole picture. Catching but how, before it finishes its sentence, is not weakness, it is mastery. Releasing a borrowed fear is not betrayal of your family. It is loyalty to the truth. Denying the old story the instant it opens its mouth is not harshness. It is simply loyalty to your own word. Standing in the answer before it appears in sight is not pretending. It is deciding. And softening the state beneath the words is not passivity. It is the one thing that finally lets the current of supply carry you instead of you fighting it. Every one of these was never 6 separate keys at all. They were 6 turns of a single key. And that one key is simply this. The moment you stop demanding to see the mechanism is finally free to move. And if you find that you want daily support turning this one key faithfully, day after day, until it becomes as natural as breathing, we built the Overflow Covenant for exactly that. A gentle daily companion of spoken words and living examples to help you catch the 2 words before they can finish their sentence. It is a small monthly offering, fully backed by a simple guarantee. If it is not a blessing to you within your first 30 days, you are welcome to a full and cheerful refund. You will find the link in the description below. And I would be honored to walk this road with you. Say it with me one more time in your own heart. My word is charged with living faith. My word opens the very doors it names. My word is my wand. And whatever bill, whatever ache, whatever quiet worry brought you to this teaching today, may you leave it now no longer asking but how, but simply resting, already provided for, already answered, already home.